Patrick, thank you very much for coming to the New York Information Security Meetup.
Thank you for having me out here. I mean, that was an awesome invitation. It's had to jump all over that when I got it.
So, the reason it's so exciting is that Dropbox is a universal brand, right? And out of curiosity, who uses Dropbox in the crowd? Can you raise your hands? Wow, it's pretty good. You have a lot of customers in the room. So you have a big title and a big role, right? Maybe you can provide us a quick overview of how you became to be where you are today, just in terms of career and so on.
Boy, career. I think of myself as like a lifelong security pro. As a kid, I was like hacking CompuServe and doing bad things to phone companies before there was the internet. And then kind of went into the boring field of IT because that was fun, but there was like no security official jobs or anything like that available. And after college, I had an opportunity of moving to San Francisco, joining Ernst Young, who had this like technology auditing practice. And that was like the first pseudo-security related job that was like available. There were still like no real security jobs. And then from there I was exposed like during the first .com bubble basically to all of these awesome business models, and all of a sudden people like started paying me to break into their companies, which is like, oh my God, I can actually get paid to do this type of work, which was just absolutely phenomenal. And from there it went to a couple of security product companies, eventually moved into my first CISO role, which was McKesson Corporation, moved to another CISO role at Kaiser Permanente, which is a very large healthcare organization. And from there, skipped to Salesforce.com, where I spent the last 3.5 years as their chief trust officer, my first real exposure to cloud computing. And then just late last year, Dropbox came knocking at my door and made me an offer I couldn't refuse. And now I'm over at Dropbox since January. So that's kind of the career progression.
Perfect. So give us an overview of how important security is for Dropbox as an organization.
So I wouldn't have joined them if it wasn't really, really important. So it's one of those things where I'm like long enough in my career that I'm really picky about where I work and what I do. And what really appealed to me about Dropbox is that if you look at the company values, if you step off the elevators at Dropbox headquarters, you're going to see a couple of paintings. But the first painting really reflects the company's value around trust, which is be worthy of trust. I mean, you'll literally see a painting that says be worthy of trust. That's one of our company values. And it is so powerful. It's reflected throughout the organization. And it's kind of a necessary element to have baked into the DNA of any cloud company. Because when you think about what cloud computing is, your customers are basically trusting you with their most important assets, their data. And if you screw up, if you do something that makes you not worthy of trust, whether it's availability issues, whether it's a security breach, whether it's you've not met your compliance requirements, it doesn't matter what it really is. If you break the trust of the customers that has taken a long time to build, your business is going to suffer dramatically because it's a competitive environment and they can pull themselves out. Your revenue model in a cloud environment is based on customers being happy over an extended period of time. It's not like buying a piece of software, throwing it over the wall and saying, go be prosperous customer and pay me some maintenance dollars on this. It's a totally different revenue model that relies on long-term customer trust and happiness.
Mm-hmm. So you can never disconnect security and cybersecurity into what the business is doing. Mm-hmm. So how do you align the business priorities with your cybersecurity overall stance?
It's actually not that hard. So if you think about what's the most important thing when you join a company around kind of as a predictor of success for the security organization, I think that most important thing is exactly what I just talked about. Do the senior executives get it to make it a priority from the top down? Do they understand the vulnerability in their business? In like a cloud business, it's vulnerable to basically trust failures. So they understand that this is something that has to be deeply embedded in the organization. And when that exists, like it does at Salesforce or at Dropbox, it makes your life as a security professional much easier. If you're in an organization where you're buried a couple of layers in IT and you continuously have to fight upward to get folks to understand why they should be paying more attention, that's a tough problem to have.
Perfect. So in your opinion, what is the single most important aspect of security? Where do you put your most focus in?
I would say because our scale is phenomenal. Our scale, we're getting close to 500 million users of Dropbox right now globally. Over 70% of them are outside the United States. And when I look at the attack activity that we actually see, it's highly predictable in the sense that we see a pattern where passwords are compromised somewhere else on the internet. They're cracked, and then they are tested really in an industrial scale, that very widely distributed botnets that basically test those passwords to see if they gain access to something in Dropbox, and then from there, what's in those Dropboxes. A lot of them seem to be focused on stealing Bitcoin wallets and other things like that. So it's very highly automated, very industrial, very criminally oriented. So if I take a step back from that and say, well, what's the underlying problem? The biggest problem seems to be password reuse, that among those like 500 million people, the vast majority of them still don't understand that it's the weakest link. If they use that password across many different websites and the weakest link gets hacked, everything else basically falls apart. So what we've done is we've invested in this pretty significantly. We've 3 types of two-factor authentication. Most recently, we introduced U2F support, universal two-factor, actually hardware token support. We're trying to educate our customers about two-factor being a necessity if you want to survive. And we actually have a project going on right now where hopefully in the next couple of months we'll launch it, where we're going to incent people with additional free space in Dropbox. If they go through a security health check, they actually configure it to make sure that it's the optimal settings, that their password strength, we actually have like a password strength algorithm, it's beyond a certain level, and they enable two-factor. So we're going to give our users an incentive to deal with this authentication problem because it is such a big problem, poor authentication choices.
That's pretty awesome to give something back in order for to get the end user.
Got to bribe them to be more secure. That's
So you heard that here first, I guess.
Yeah.
And it leads me to the next question. A while back, there was a Dropbox phishing attempt on some of the users and so on. And I don't know if, how do you, so you have this in the wild that, somebody's trying to harvest, obviously, Dropbox accounts on the passwords and so on. How do you deal with that? Is something that just comes about and...
So we have a pretty sophisticated and significant fraud and abuse team. So we have all kinds of signal out there. We're trying to identify when this is happening. We have an intervention process, includes like takedown requests with various ISPs that may be hosting some of these phishing sites. There is a lot of this going on. And because we're a very well-known brand name, just like Google or anybody else out there, it's awesome for phishers because they capitalize on a well-known brand name. So they will like replicate sharing messages and emails saying, hey, you just received a file, it looks all Dropboxy and awesome, click here to get infected with malware. And so that's one element that we have to be reactive. I mean, it's difficult to be proactive on some of these things. The other element that we're actually concerned about is abuse of our platform, where if you look at the more sophisticated strains of malware, they have many different components going from like an exploit kit to like a dropper and then various components getting pulled in. We work very hard to make sure that it's difficult, expensive, and risky to use Dropbox as part of your supply chain for doing that if you're a criminal. But we do see some of that activity where Dropbox is used as part of the distribution mechanism.
Okay. So in the past, the security executives that were here, one of the questions I typically ask is, in your role, and as a senior executive for security, a lot of times you have to be a bit of an evangelist, but also you have to be a bit of a translator to translate the security talk to executives that do not have the background in security. So tell us a bit, how do you do that on a day-to-day basis?
So let me go to the second criteria why I joined Dropbox, which is everybody is really a hell of a lot smarter than I am. I mean, our CEO came from MIT, and I think the average age of the company is somewhere like 30, is what one of our kind of like HR equivalent folks told me. So I feel like a grandfather there. So I'm surrounded by like hyper-intelligent people who kind of know what the heck they're doing. So I don't have to deal with the convincing people to understand the risk and the technology. And the same thing at like Salesforce, and it's like cloud businesses are very, very savvy. Now, if I flash back to my prior career, that's in the healthcare sector, for example. It's a gargantuan challenge to actually, where you have to invest the time and simplify and uplift the conversations and the macro risks. And I don't envy folks that still have to do that.
So it sounds like you're in a good spot right now.
It's a very good spot, yes.
So And this once again like a typical question: what keeps you up at night? You obviously have 500 million users. A lot can go wrong, right?
Yeah.
And you have a big role. So what keeps you up?
I could say about breaches and things like that. I think what keeps me up at night is if we respond wrong. And any company nowadays is liable to have a problem at some point in time. And I'm hoping that customers will judge companies not based on the problem. Some problems are really stupid and should be avoided, obviously. But if something happens, I want to be judged based on how we respond. How transparent are we? How fast are we in resolving those issues? How much do we prioritize the users over everything else? So what keeps me up at night is if I think about how many moving elements there are and what can happen, I want to make sure that the company stays really aligned, that we always prioritize our users first, we focus on transparency, and we deal with things very, very effectively and efficiently. I'll give an example that recently you guys saw the whole Ashley Madison thing, right? Ever heard of that site? We take a very proactive stance to protecting our customers, and one of the things that we did is we have an amazing team of these threat intel folks in our fraud and abuse team. We're able to get the intel, figure out kind of the list of people that were affected by that, did a cross-reference with everybody who has a Dropbox account, identified about 3 million users that had overlap between being Dropbox and Ashley Madison customers. And we took the step of proactively forcing a password reset because we had no idea whether those passwords are out or not, even though they're allegedly encrypted using bcrypt and super hard to crack. Actually, we were just proactive and said, not good enough, we're going to protect these folks. And then just today I read an article about how they actually had a secondary algorithm for storing the hashes. I think it was just basically MD5 concatenated with a couple of different elements. So it was obviously that we did the right thing, but we take some of those risks where the decision was made, do we push the button and force a password reset and potentially alienate 3 million customers who now have to go through a hoop to log back on? But it was the right thing to do for our customers. So what keeps me up awake at night is I want to make sure we maintain that put the customers first, take risks.
Super. So in the past, I would say 10, 15 years, what changes have you seen in the security space in terms of technology, strategy, and so on? If you can. I know it's a big question.
It's a huge question. I would say one of the biggest changes I've seen is how less relevant my own technical skills are. And that's because I grew up in an age where security was the technology stack that started at the network layer and goes up through the servers and some of the application stuff. But nowadays, security is much, much more at the application layer. If you don't have that developer background yourself, you're missing something, and you have to hire really smart people. And with that shift to the application layer, I would say if you look at it, it's almost like an inverted triangle right here. And if you're dealing with things at a network layer and OS layer, it's very well defined, it's very predictable, and the complexity is bounded in terms of the problems you're trying to solve. When you start getting into the complicated application layer architectures we're dealing with right now, it's exponentially more complicated in terms of finding and solving those problems, maintaining quality, thinking about what can happen from an attacker's perspective. So I guess to summarize, the complexity of the attack surface that you have to protect has increased dramatically over the last 10 to 15 years.
And so kind of the segue to the next question is, how do you see your business in the next 3 years, and are you prepared for it in terms of what's coming?
How do I see it in the next 3 years? Well,
aside from having another 500 million users.
Yeah, it's going to be, exactly. That's definitely going to happen. We already get an immense amount of attention. And one of the observations I have is that if you're in a consumer internet business of scale, your products have to be more secure than most enterprise-grade products that are out there because you're actually getting attacked at a massive scale that other products don't. So from a product strength perspective, I feel really good. I think what's going to change, new things are going to get added. We're evolving to be much more of a collaboration-oriented company. Mm-hmm. So if you think the business that Dropbox is in, first thing that comes to mind is storage and sync. Are we going to be competitive if that's all we do in the future, given that's kind of a race to zero and free storage? Probably not. So we have to figure out a way of engaging and delighting customers that is very focused around the collaboration side of the business. And when you think about collaboration and the innovation in that, that's something where we have to keep a very close eye on it to make sure that we maintain our principles on data protection. And when you start offering message-oriented systems, also the opportunity for abuse changes significantly compared to just file sharing.
Interesting. So maybe I'll open up the stage here for crowd participation. If you have any questions, to go ahead.
Mm-hmm.
So Dropbox has a lot of engineers now.
Yeah.
One of the things that a lot of companies, especially a lot of companies that have grown quickly, don't take into account is protection of intellectual property.
Mm-hmm.
In particular, the algorithms that you guys have to scale up or scale down, or your software or whatever. What are some of the challenges around that in a company where you're hiring so many new people all the time?
So maybe would you like to?
Yeah, so I'm trying to, yeah. So the question was basically, how do we protect all of this intellectual property that we're creating in an environment where you have a huge number of developers and where the developer culture persists, which is really very much about sharing out there. So the answer is, if I think about how much effort do I put on the focus of protecting, like, the source code, for example, not a hell of a lot, because it's actually an incredibly difficult problem to solve. And I think the approach we take is, like, detect when there has been abuse, somebody's actually using it in a business context, and then enforce using legal means. Because if you think about how much you have to impact.
May I have your attention, please? May I have your attention, please?
Oops.
This is the fire message. Today we will conduct a test of the fire alarm system.
Saved by the bell!
That's where it started getting interesting.
All right.
Please disregard any taunts or strokes you may hear or see.
All right. Thank you.
Let's give it odds that someone hacked the system.
So I mean, so like I said, I'll be quite honest about, like, the protecting a source code. I looked. Okay, hey Bojan, you asked the question. Pay attention to my answer. But if you look at the problem, protecting source code is phenomenally difficult if you want to protect it from being leaked. But what you have to focus on is the other element of threat, which is what is the ability for somebody to commit code that may be backdoored or is corrupt, basically. So if we think about the problem of intellectual property protection, it's gonna leak. The people are going to get out there. We'll enforce that. But where we really control it, including using, like, two individuals have to verify, basically check the code before it's checked in, and we're hardening also using two-factor basically in the entire check-in process to verify that. I think the promotion of code into production and that element of the supply chain is something that's much more interesting versus trying to prevent every possible avenue of leaking it, because getting into the developer workflow and on their desktop and disrupting them to prevent those types of leaks, if you want to do it properly, I think was massively disruptive.
Yeah, go ahead.
As you yourself said just a few moments ago, Dropbox is more consumer-facing than maybe enterprise, to some extent maybe, historically maybe. As far as I understand it, you are making strides in order to change that.
Yeah.
If that's in fact the case, how much of a role is security playing in the challenges maybe that you're facing in the adoption of Dropbox in your enterprise?
Yeah, so the enterprise side of it is growing dramatically fast, and I'll share a stat. I think we have over 130,000 businesses now using Dropbox for Business globally, so it's a phenomenal amount of companies that are adopting it. And ask yourself, why did they hire a dinosaur like me from Salesforce? It's because I have experience in an enterprise cloud environment in working with customers and figuring what are the features and the priorities that we have to deliver. How do enterprise customers think? What's important to them? How do we sell to them? How do we make them feel comfortable that we are a partner they can trust? So the growth on the business side has been exponential. I would say that's the way I can look at it. And from a strategy perspective, if I look at our product roadmap, a lot of the features that we're delivering are focused on improving the feature functionality of the Dropbox for Business Enterprise product, as well as adding in new security features that give our customers more control. So U2F was something we launched across everyone, but on the Dropbox for Business side, we have SAML support, we have integration with Active Directory, we have a lot of APIs that provides things such as log integration. Like if you're a Splunk user, you can integrate Splunk directly into Dropbox using the Dropbox API so that you can get feeds of all the activity and do assessment of that. DLP vendors integrate via the API. So we've really focused on building out a core set of features that we continue to grow, as well as building a partner ecosystem for the business customers so they can plug in their existing security products into Dropbox.
Perfect, go ahead.
Going back, you mentioned that you have these situations where companies or individuals are hosting maybe malware on Dropbox accounts. And that lends itself to an interesting question. To detect that, you have to go inside of users' accounts to find it, perhaps proactively. So that could be construed as a privacy breach depending on how you do it. So how do you do the trade-off between protecting user privacy and protecting the security of the platform?
So this is a great way. So when I answer this when I talk to enterprise customers and I tell them we don't scan for malware, they're like, what? You don't really? Because when we look at kind of the contract that we have, it is very, very privacy focused. We say it's your stuff. We don't look into your stuff. It's a very simple contract. It's also a very simple business model. We don't monetize based on the customer's data. We don't have any kind of advertising-based business model. It's very simple. It's your stuff and we protect it. And the EFF gives us like a perfect rating and who's got your back, even resisting like government inquiries and whatnot. So we are super privacy focused to the point that you really have to abuse our platform for us to look. So when we suspect that there are legitimate violations of our terms and conditions, basically, if it's very clear that you're using us as a platform to attack others, and you're basically doing things that could be potentially illegal, so at that point in time, we'll take a look. So what we end up doing, and I won't disclose the details of this, but we basically have a risk algorithm that looks at the activity, what's happening inside of a Dropbox account, just based on kind of like the metadata activity. And if it looks like something risky or bad is happening at that point in time, triggered by sharing activity, by the way, which is if you don't share, you have perfect privacy, but an element of sharing activity. So as soon as you send that first link out and you share, you've in a way basically said, okay, I've selectively given up my right to perfect privacy, basically. And at that point in time, you have potentials for terms of service violations and also harming others. And we will look into it based on kind of a risk threshold being hit.
Sure, go in the back there.
Outside, I work in the public sector, and I have an incredibly hard time trying to transfer the knowledge to bureaucracy, to get anything done at a security level, because they consider it as like you're impeding progress. They feel like they're enclosed, they have a domain, so it's not going on. How do you feel about, this incredible amount of breaches going on, at that level? Do you feel that they're actually going to work on that? I know that you're kind of wide open company, and
I'm a bit of a, so repeating the question, so, it's really around what are the dynamics around kind of the public sector and breaches, cloud versus on-premise. Having been kind of like in charge of very large enterprise scale operations, I think one of the challenges that we have, especially given what I mentioned earlier around the complexity of the stack having increased dramatically, is that security just isn't scaling, okay? So if you, for some reason, think that you can feel safer and more secure by keeping things on-premise and hiring a bunch of people, and that model is going to succeed in the future, I think that model's already proven itself as a failure because the security skill set, the budgets, everything else just isn't there to be able to provide a secure solution. Cloud providers, in contrast, have economies of scale. I can attract some of the best and brightest minds in the world to solve really big problems at a massive scale at Dropbox or at Salesforce and other cloud companies. And because the business model also is so centered around trust and because it's so focused on engineering, we can do amazing things. This whole debacle, including being agile, the whole debacle around Heartbleed, for example, that was a one afternoon engineering effort for us to address it in our infrastructure, basically, and get everybody covered. And that dynamic in terms of the ability to respond is fundamentally different than organizations that have lots of legacy systems and armies of engineers trying to figure out how to do it after waiting for somebody else to throw the patch over the wall to them to apply it. So I guess what I'm saying in summary is that if there's still a misconception, but I think it's slowly changing, that you're more secure by doing it yourself. Where I would say that if I were in CISO roles in a non-cloud company, I'd be looking at how should I be structuring my portfolio of services. So clearly, I'd want to focus my team. There are going to be services that are core to my business, which I want to retain very tight control over. And then there are services that are ancillary. And how do I identify the best-of-breed cloud providers, integrate them into things such as authentication and the monitoring solutions that I have, and do a solid job of selecting them based on their security controls. But use cloud as an opportunity to reduce the attack surface that you have to defend and focus your existing security talent and your budgets on defending what you really have to focus on, your crown jewels.
Good.
Are you more concerned with internal or external attacks?
It's kind of the same, because every time you have an external, not every time, but in many cases you have an external attack. And if you look at the pathway of an attacker, if you're a pen tester or an external attacker, you are, as soon as you make that initial breach, you're going to have to discover what's going on. And you can look at kind of the kill chain and whatnot, and then eventually you move laterally and you escalate privileges to get to the target that you actually want to get to. And at that point in time, chances are you're going to pivot from using something like a highly technical attack once you've broken in. Once you've escalated the privilege, you're moving laterally through that organization as if you were a legitimate internal user. You've assumed the identity of somebody else at that point in time. So when I think about the challenge of detection, insider threat detection, if you're looking at it kind of as a lateral movement side of the type of thing, is almost identical to trying to detect an external breach. The entry point may be slightly different, but on the pathway to getting at what they want to get to, it's going to be a similar detection challenge.
Okay, time for one more. Go ahead.
How do you handle when someone actually reports you on a platform?
We applaud and we clap and we pay them money. So we participate in an open bug bounty program. We participate in HackerOne, and we literally pay them money. So it's like, yes, if you find a bug, we're happy. We'll give you credit for it. We want people to find bugs on the platform. There's an awful lot at stake, and I don't want to pretend that every piece of code that we write is perfect. It's not. So we appreciate it when security researchers actually put the effort into trying to find bugs. And by the way, what we found is like some of these folks, some of these researchers are phenomenal. I mean, they're out of countries. It's like, I think the story I heard one time was like this kid living out of his parents' house in Cairo, Egypt somewhere, doesn't speak any English, it's just amazingly brilliant at finding bugs. And when he submitted the bugs, it was in the format of screen cams, because he doesn't have the English language skill where he would replicate the bugs as like a screen cam video. And I think he made enough money to basically support his family doing that, because he was just so brilliant basically doing that. And conversely, at Salesforce, we had a similar case where there was an Israeli researcher who was just absolutely phenomenal based on this history, and we actually used that as an opportunity to convert him to an employee. So I think bug bounties are an amazing way to tap into kind of a global pool of intellect around finding really sophisticated problems, where you really need a wide diversity of skill sets to look at the complexity of the tech stack that you have.
Perfect. Patrick, it's been phenomenal. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. Thank you. So let's take 5 minutes.